When the judges ruled Israel, a great famine came upon the land of Bethlehem. There lived a man named Elimelech, with his wife Naomi and their 2 sons. Because there was no food in the land, Elimelech made a difficult decision. He took his family and journeyed to the land of Moab, hoping to find a place where they could survive. They left their home believing they were searching for a better future, but they did not know what awaited. With their belongings packed and their hearts uncertain, Elimelech, Naomi, and their sons began their journey. Step by step, they traveled away from Bethlehem and toward Moab. They carried what little they had, trusting that tomorrow would be better than today. But sometimes, the road we choose does not unfold the way we expect. And soon, Naomi's life would change forever. But in Moab, tragedy struck. Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died. Naomi was suddenly left without the man she loved. Her heart was broken, but she still had her 2 sons. She did not know that another painful chapter was about to begin. Naomi's sons married Ruth and Orpah, women from Moab. For a while, there was hope. But then tragedy came again. Both of Naomi's sons died. Now 3 women stood together as widows. Naomi had lost her husband. She had lost her sons. And she believed that everything she had was gone. But God was not finished with her story. One day, Naomi heard good news. The Lord had visited his people and provided food in Bethlehem. So Naomi decided to return home. She began the journey with Ruth and Orpah. But along the way, Naomi stopped and told them, "Go back to your mother's homes." Naomi wanted them to find new lives. She did not want them to suffer because of her. Orpah wept as she embraced Naomi. She loved her mother-in-law, but eventually she turned back toward Moab. Her journey with Naomi had come to an end. But Ruth remained. She stood beside Naomi when there was no wealth to offer her. No security. No promise of an easy future. Only love and loyalty. Naomi asked Ruth to return. But Ruth refused. She made one of the most powerful declarations of loyalty recorded in Scripture. "Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people. And your God will be my God." Ruth was not simply choosing Naomi. She was choosing a new people. A new home. And the God of Israel. She had no idea that this decision would change her destiny forever. After a long journey, Naomi and Ruth finally arrived in Bethlehem. The people recognized Naomi. But Naomi was no longer the woman who had left years before. She returned carrying grief in her heart. She said, "I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty." Naomi believed she had returned with nothing. But standing beside her was Ruth. And Ruth was about to become part of God's plan for restoration. Ruth knew that something had to be done. She could not simply sit and wait. So she went into the fields to gather leftover grain behind the harvesters. She worked from morning until evening. She was a widow. She was a foreigner. She had very little. But she was willing to work. And sometimes, your miracle begins with simply being faithful where God has placed you. The field belonged to a wealthy and respected man named Boaz. One day, Boaz noticed Ruth. He asked his workers, "Who is that young woman?" They told him about Ruth. They told him how she had left her homeland and remained faithful to Naomi. Boaz saw something beyond her poverty. He saw her character. He saw her loyalty. And he decided to show her favor. Boaz called Ruth and spoke kindly to her. He told her not to leave his field. He told her to stay close to his workers. And then he said, "I have heard about everything you have done for Naomi. May the Lord reward you for your faithfulness." Ruth was surprised. She had come to the field simply looking for grain. But God was preparing something much greater. Boaz went even further. He instructed his workers to leave extra grain for Ruth. What Ruth gathered that day was far more than she expected. She had entered the field as a poor widow. But she was leaving with evidence of God's favor. When God decides to bless someone, He can make provision appear in places they never expected. When Ruth returned home, Naomi was amazed at the amount of grain she carried. "Where did you work today?" Naomi asked. Ruth answered, "In the field of a man named Boaz." The moment Naomi heard the name Boaz, hope returned to her heart. She knew that Boaz was a close relative, and he was a potential family redeemer. Naomi had once said, "I came back empty." But now, she began to see that God had never abandoned her. The Lord had brought Ruth into her life. He had led Ruth into Boaz's field. And now, the door of hope was beginning to open. Sometimes, when we think God has brought us back empty, He is actually preparing us for restoration. Naomi instructed Ruth to approach Boaz. That night, Ruth went to the threshing floor. She approached him respectfully and made her request known. She was asking Boaz to become her family redeemer. It was a moment of courage. Ruth had no guarantee of what Boaz would say, but she trusted the process. And Boaz responded with kindness. Boaz admired Ruth's character. He promised that he would do everything properly. But there was another relative who had the first right to redeem Naomi's family. Boaz could not ignore the proper process. So he promised Ruth, "I will settle the matter." Before the sun rose, Ruth knew that her future was in God's hands. The next morning, Boaz went to the city gate. There he met the elders of Bethlehem and the relative who had the first right of redemption. Boaz presented the matter before them. There was land belonging to Naomi's family. There was also Ruth. The decision would determine the future of Naomi's family. The relative considered the matter. But when he understood the full responsibility involved, he gave up his right of redemption. Boaz stepped forward. He accepted the responsibility. The agreement was confirmed before the elders. Boaz would become Ruth's redeemer. What Ruth could never have accomplished by herself, God had arranged through divine providence. And so Boaz took Ruth as his wife. The widow from Moab had become the wife of a respected man in Bethlehem. The woman who once had no future she could see now had a new beginning. The people celebrated. And Ruth's story was changing from one of loss to one of hope. But God still had more in store. Then the Lord blessed Ruth and Boaz with a son. His name was Obed. Imagine Naomi's joy. The woman who once cried, "I have come back empty," was now holding a child in her arms. God had turned her mourning into joy. He had turned her emptiness into fullness. He had turned her pain into a testimony. The women of Bethlehem celebrated with Naomi. They praised God for giving her a redeemer. Naomi had lost her husband. She had lost her sons. She had returned to Bethlehem believing her life was finished. But God was writing another chapter. Her story had not ended in sorrow. It ended in restoration. Ruth's story did not end with Obed. Obed became the father of Jesse. And Jesse became the father of King David. Generations later, from the line of David came Jesus Christ. Think about it. Ruth was a foreigner. She was a widow. She had experienced loss. But her faithfulness became part of God's great plan of redemption. So never despise your difficult season. Never think your story is finished. The God who restored Ruth and Naomi is still able to transform lives today. Your pain is not the end. Your loss is not the end. Your waiting is not the end. God is still writing your story. And when He finishes, your testimony will speak for generations.